Welcome to Issues That Matter. We're going to have another conversation about George Santos today. And my guest today will be Reema Rasool, who was a Democratic candidate for Congress, but unfortunately she lost the primary. And my dear friend Steve Bihar. So, Reema, tell us a little bit about your campaign, how you get what made you decide to do it, and most importantly, in the course of the primary for Congress, how much talk was there about George Santos?
So yes, I ran in the Democratic primary for New York 3 this past election cycle. I did end up losing to Robert Zimmerman, who then went on to be the general candidate against George. My candidacy was a little bit different. I'm not a politician. I'm a mom. I own my own business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a founder of a not-for-profit trade association for women in business. And I really got into this to talk about small business taxes and, talk about, just bullying in schools and really to talk about the political class and say, listen, I think more just regular people like you and me who are part of the PTA and also employing people and raising kids should run for office. That should be normalized. We were not able to raise a lot of money. And then I'll be honest, I actually, really put a pause. I didn't really aggressively fundraise after a few of my opponents very quickly were able to raise $1 million in a heartbeat. But we kept on with the campaign. We had a very tight budget. Steve, I'm sitting here with you today because Steve introduced us. Steve was extremely helpful to me. He was connected to me through a friend. We had breakfast in a diner one morning, and literally the next week, because of Steve, our campaign had an office. Which was amazing. He helped us with a space that we could afford and a space that we really, really like in an area that we wanted to be in. Part of the new lines of the new district area of Northern Queens. None of our opponents had opened an office in the Queens area of this district. I am, a first generation American. My parents came to this country in the 1970s to continue their medical education. They're both physicians, and they moved right into this district, right into New York 3. They came here to train at Long Island Jewish Hospital. The fact of the matter is, the first apartment that they got was in Glen Oaks, Queens, on 263rd Street. Steve actually was able to facilitate me opening my office for Congress on 263rd Street, the same street my parents had their apartment on. And I think that's just the American story, that within, 40 years, the daughter of immigrants is now running for Congress and has opened an office on the same street. Our campaign was very much about reaching out to the South Asian American diaspora here in the district, which is vast. This district, we have a very, very fast growing number of South Asian Americans, Asian Americans, and we've never had even an Asian American run for this seat. This seat has always been held by a white man. We've never even had a woman. In 2021, I'm a business owner. I actually run a consulting firm where I do business development strategy operations for US financial vehicles in South Asia, in the MENA region. And before the pandemic, I was mostly either on a plane or feeling guilty about not spending time with my kids or, in closing a deal. I was in Asia sometimes 3 times a month in the same month because I would just go for 4 days and be here or be there. My company was expanding into Turkey when COVID hit. And I was very much grounded, and my life COVID changed my life completely. When we moved from Manhattan back to Long Island, where I grew up, back into the same district that I grew up in. Now my kids are in the same schools that I went to. And I started getting involved locally and was asked to run in 2021 locally for the Nassau County Democrats for Town of Oyster Bay board. And I did that in 2021. I was the first Muslim the Democrats in Nassau County ever put on the ballot. One of the very first South Asians ever, but they are trying to diversify. Just on my a slate alone, there was also another South Asian woman. My slate in 2021 for Oyster Bay Town, from executive all the way, there were 5 of us, all women. It was the first all women slate. I learned a lot about politics, but that experience is what pushed me to run for Congress, because I said, we need to make this become more normalized, where regular people who would not necessarily be what you would think of a politician, need to jump in. So we were about voter education. We were about registering new voters, and we were, I'm really proud of the campaign that we ran. But to your second part of the question, yeah, we early on, I didn't really know much about him. When he ran in 2020 against Tom Suozzi during the pandemic, I didn't hear anything about him. The press was so quiet. It was just like, who is this guy? It was almost like Tom Suozzi was running unopposed. I didn't even hear his name, right? In 2020. Then all of a sudden now in 2022, he's back. The Republicans push him up again. And we have a very intense Democratic primary. At one time, there were 6 candidates running. At the end, on election day, there were 5 of us, and Robert Zimmerman came out as the winner. But because of the redistricting, the relining, the election date getting postponed for 3 months, the primary election was lengthened by 3 months, resulting in a 10-week general election. And I think these are a lot of the things that people, it's the context of what was happening at that time as to how all of this like perfect chaos that George Santos was able to get elected, not to mention the fact that the stories he told, this is it's a very Jewish district. He did represent himself as a descendant of Holocaust refugees. Like he, he also represented himself as a descendant of Ukrainian heritage. New York 3 happens to be the most populated district of Ukrainian Americans. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that too. That's a fact. So here in New York 3, we have the most of the Ukrainian diaspora in America live right here. I think that, it was all these little things did kind of get him in rooms. Also stating that he was this big finance guy, extremely successful, that'll get you into a living room here on the North Shore. But early on, when the DCCC did release their oppo on him, you did start seeing tiny little slithers of a story. That in that oppo, we knew that his pet charity didn't have any legs with the IRS. It was just kind of floating, right? He was just doing some weird stuff. Nobody looked into it though. We knew that there were a few, his finances, just from his disclosures against Tom Suozzi, he only had I think it was something like $40,000, $50,000 net to his name, assets altogether. All of a sudden, 2 years later, he's claiming that he's somewhere between $3 and $11 million. Big red flag. No press decided to pick that up, which I don't get that. But these things we knew before the election.
So, Steve, exactly what did you know before the election? What was told? I know the Weekly did story or a story about him, but nobody picked up on it. None of the other publications or news on Long Island picked up on it. So basically, do you think he said, "Oh, this is a piece of cake. I'm going to have a free reign. I'm going to walk right into this"? What do you think, Steve?
Well, I mean, to use Tom Suozzi's description of George Santos, we all knew back in 2020 that he's a kook. And, that was the word, kook, nut job. Those are the words that, I had heard for 2 years describing the guy. And everyone laughed at him. And suddenly, 2 years later, he's portraying himself as somebody totally different than he did 2 years earlier. And to be frank, I wasn't paying as much attention to that district because I was campaign manager for the Democratic candidate in the 19th district, my friend Sanjeev Jindal. But at the end of the day, you saw after the primaries that between the campaign Santos was running, he actually had money. He didn't spend any money in 2020. And as we all infamously know, he loaned himself $700,000 alone, plus all the other money he ran. So he had a legitimate multi-million-dollar campaign going on in a year where the Democrats in New York, in particularly the Democrats on Long Island, weren't running very strong. So I'm not sure about Reema, but we kind of had the feeling that he could win going into that general. You know, come September, October, we're kind of thinking that there may be a little bit of a red wave, maybe not in the country, but out on Long Island, and he could win. So it was a different feeling from one campaign to the next.
So in 2000, he ran on the Republican line. And is it safe to say he was MAGA back then?
Oh, yeah. He's
Okay.
always been a MAGA nut job.
Okay. So in 2020, he ran on the Republican ticket. So I'm sure that the party on Long Island and the state party maybe, and even the federal party must have known that he was nuts, right?
I think everybody knew he was nuts. I don't think anybody in the Democratic or the Republican Party didn't know that he was nuts. But the problem was that, especially in the last 6-7 years, nuts have been regularly getting elected in the Republican Party. You know, the idea that you've got, I mean, just look at the State of the Union Tuesday night. You've got, Bobo Bobert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and all these other crazies screaming at the president. I remember it happened to Obama.
Right. But then they
10 years
swiftly.
Yeah.
It was
and that was a crazy
Republican
thing.
Party.
People were like, "Oh my God, how could you do that?" It was looked at as a crazy thing. Now it's the norm.
Right.
It's the norm for these crazy nutbags to be screaming down the president during the State of the Union address. So
okay,
we're in a different world.
My question to you is, if the Republican Party in Nassau County knew that he didn't have both oars in the water, to put it mildly, did they try to field another candidate?
Reema, I don't remember them even trying. Do you?
I know that there was a candidate who wanted to run. See, the Republicans are a little different here in Nassau County. They really are in line with their leader. It's not like, Jay Jacobs wanted a 6-candidate primary in the for the Dems here in the district, but it happened, right? People were like, we're going to do what we're going to do. And, it doesn't work like that with the Republicans here in Nassau County. I do remember that there was somebody who started, exploring a run, and he was asked to not run. And I can't remember his name right now, but he was either, I don't know why it's in my head that was he a nurse or I don't know, but there was a Republican, maybe he's a lawyer, I don't know, but there was a Republican. And recently he was in the press again because of the same question that you had. Somebody was looking to why didn't nobody primary this guy if everyone knew he was nuts? Basically, the general consensus is that very early on, especially after the first reiteration of the district maps that made this district, we actually folded in areas of the Bronx, Westchester County, all the way to Rye, New York, were part of this district. Then
Wow.
we also had Suffolk County, Nassau County, and a little bit of Queens. When the first reiteration of the new 2022 maps for the district came out, this seat became very solid blue, very solidly blue, before the courts overturned the maps. And I think that that has a lot to do with the Republicans saying, listen, let this guy go again. We're not going to win this seat anyway. Right. Also, by the time then it did become a more favorable map, it became very purple. They took Huntington out of our district. They, you know, when you know, the Republicans won at the courts and the maps were redrawn, the new map master really was just looking at county lines. I don't think he was looking at demographics at all. He was just looking at lines. And so basically, we became very purple, to be honest, with the second reiteration of the maps. And I think by then it was too late, though, for the
So-
Republicans to put up another candidate.
So from Queens to Long Island, it's a tremendous big district, right?
It is. It's a very big part of the North Shore of Long Island. It has northern Queens. It's a
Okay.
huge, it's a big district, and it's a very interesting district, though. It's the Asian population in the district has grown tremendously. And I think that the Republicans were very much able to control the narrative, with Zeldin being a gubernatorial candidate as well from Long Island. I think that was a huge push for all of the Republican congressional candidates that did win from Long Island. It was a lot of these people that came out to vote for Zeldin, because at the time, New York media was really pushing this story that, oh my gosh, Zeldin might win.
Right. You know, when I initially talked to you, Reema, the one thing that you said really, really interests me about the press coverage and the fact that the papers weren't picking up on any of this stuff. You talked about when the New York Times wanted to do a story on him.
Yeah.
That is an amazing story. Please tell it.
Absolutely. So after the election, basically the pitch from the Times for those reporters who did, you know, Dan Gold, who broke the story initially for the Times, they weren't going out to do an expose on George Santos. They were going out to do a puff piece on this, you know, out of nowhere, gay Republican new congressman who, you know, took out a gentleman who was the Democratic nominee, who has been, you know, a DNC member, who everyone just thought was a shoo-in for, you know, and then this guy came out of nowhere. Who is this guy? Gay Republican business owner, married to, you know, a Brazilian, also Jewish, also Latino. It was like amazing. Who is this, right? Like a unicorn. And they went out to do a puff piece on him. And they started trying to find him. They went to the address that he's registered to vote at. And when they rang the doorbell, the woman, and asked for George Santos, the woman was like, what are you talking about? Right. And they were like, this is George Santos's home. This is where he's registered to vote from. She had no idea what they were talking about. And then that was from there, it led to everything being questioned, I imagine. And what we know now, that, you know, every story this guy has told is a story. It has very zero to extremely little basis in reality. We don't know who this guy is at all. Everything is made up.
So, Steve, you and I have talked about the press before in our other conversations, and I find this very interesting. Do you think if the more papers had got on board and started digging into him and talking about the truth of what's really going on, do you think he might not have won? What do you think, Steve?
I think that there's a story in the story here. And that story is the garbage that local press has become. And I've had to deal with this personally. I'm dealing with it still every day. When I ran 2 years ago, a rogue reporter in the Daily News wrote stories about me that were just false about, called me a sexist, called me a racist. And I was appalled when they first came out. And then I reached out to some other members of the local press, and some of them just wrote stories and repeated the lies that he said in the first place. And, I was out there saying, listen, do some reporting. This is all nonsense. And they just didn't care. And there's no reporting. There's no investigative reporting. Basically, with me, this rogue reporter that we're still trying to figure out what his game was, why he would, write such lies about me, that just, even after he was told it was false, even after he was told where he can see the evidence that it was false, he wrote it anyway. And instead of looking into this, the press just either ignored it, or some of them repeated the lies. And I literally had to deal with it this week. A reporter in a local paper here in Queens wrote just 2 sentences about repeating the lies that the Daily News reporter wrote about me. And I called him up and I said, hey, I said, you realize that these are lies. Here's the place to show it's their lies. And I emailed him a copy of the complaint that I've filed lawsuit in New York State Supreme Court in Manhattan for defamation. And he's like, oh, I didn't know. And he took it down and wrote something else. But the point is, nobody wants to do the research. No reporters want to do their jobs. No reporters have an interest. I've had it in the city council race. I had it probably, Reema, you probably dealt with it out in NY3. They want to cover the governor or a Senate race or something like that. And part of it may be the fact that because of the internet and because we're 24-hour news, and if you turn over here, MSNBC's on right now with news coverage of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So there's probably less need, and these budgets have been cut from the reporting staffs at the local newspapers. So there may just not have been anybody there. No one's at the switch. No one's home to actually do the investigative reporting that the New York Times finally did. The New York Times still has a staff of investigative reporting, but these local papers, they don't.
Okay, so you just brought up a good point. The weekly paper, North Shore Ledger, is it?
North Shore Leader.
Leader, I'm sorry. So North Shore Leader did a article about Santos, and like none of the other papers really picked it up. The news channels never picked it up or anything. And you talk about short-staffed. You think that that's an excuse? Do you think it's an excuse? Because now everybody's doing stories on George Santos. They
Right.
should have done it before.
Well,
Sure.
I have direct knowledge of Robert Zimmerman's campaign staff and PR teams pitching to all these media outlets exactly these stories, that the pet charity isn't real. Please look at his finances. Can we please do a story to put? And I think that New York media didn't realize the actual scene that they had created themselves. Every day they were telling us how unsafe we were. Every day they were telling us, oh my God, Lee Zeldin's gonna win. It was a frenzy of stuff that just wasn't true. What happened now? I always am like, what happened to all of that news of everything being so dangerous around here? It's gone now. It's gone now. It was for the election cycle. It's really sad. I think they were so unaware of their own impact. They really thought that this guy had no chance. They really thought that Santos had no chance. Zimmerman is a shoo-in. And they didn't realize what was going to happen here on Long Island. Long Island is not Manhattan. Long Island is not New York City. It's not. Long Island is conservative. Long Island is very purple. If you look at our county, Nassau County government, if you look at our town of Oyster Bay government, it's all Republican right now, right? And I don't think that the media took the entire scene into account. I think they were so zoomed in that they didn't see that this whole scenario that was being created largely by them, and that these Republicans were going to steamroll. I know for a fact that there were media publications that came back to Zimmerman's team and quote said, it's only a story if he wins. Quote, that this isn't a story right now. If he wins, then it's a story. And guess what? He won, and now we have dozens of stories every day. Every single day of, more nonsense, more nonsense. It's all clickbait. It's a result of, the capitalization of investigative journalism. Look at, during Trump's time, all of these reporters are writing books now. Shouldn't we have known that stuff then? That he was doing all of these crazy things? It's the same thing. It's all about clicks.
So the fact that the press and the party kind of thought that Zimmerman was going to win, so therefore whatever Santos did was, they didn't care because he wasn't viable. Would you say that was correct?
Yes. I mean, even Peter King, a very famous congressman from my district, right? The Republican congressman from my district. He has a PAC. He has a political PAC where, they donate to Republican candidates here in New York. He donated to every Republican except George Santos. There must have been a reason. They knew something.
Right.
Right. So they knew he was shady. They didn't like him. He wasn't the most popular guy. He got swept in with the Zeldin red wave that happened here in New York.
But that being said, I'll preface this by saying I really like Robert Zimmerman a lot. I think he's a very nice guy. He's very competent. But, we can't whitewash the fact that he made a strategic blunder. His campaign made a strategic blunder because, as he has said, if he knew this, he should have been, even if the press wasn't picking up on it, he should have said it in every single stump speech. And I heard Robert speak probably 30, 40, 50 times, and I never heard him say it once. He should have said it every stump speech. This guy's a fraud. He never went to these schools. He doesn't have this money. He's not Jewish. His mother did not die on 9/11. All the lies, if you knew it, you had to say it every day. And sooner or later, someone may have picked it up, but also more and more people would have, because again, I was a campaign manager in the Assembly District 19 for the Democratic candidate. New York 3 covered about 60% of our district. And I didn't know the fraud stuff. I knew the kook stuff, but I didn't know the fraud stuff about Santos until after the election. And if anybody should have known it, it should have been, the people running the campaigns down ballot from NY3. We didn't know it either. Because we could have spread it out.
I'm not sure how much of the fraud stuff did they really know. That's news to me, that they knew that he didn't go to the schools and stuff. I didn't know that. I thought what they knew was that the finance stuff, that, the money is very shady. Obviously, they knew the insurrection stuff, that he was an insurrectionist, that he was bailing out insurrectionists, right? And I know that they did talk about that quite a bit. It was in the news quite a bit before the election. But, the atmosphere at the time was that we're going to have a red wave in New York because of Lee Zeldin. And that's what all of the news media really focused on. As I said, New York Newsday did not do traditional election coverage. The New York Times, the only thing they wanted to talk about New York 3 was that, we have the first election that we've ever had two openly gay candidates running. That's the only big national news that our district would get. Puff piece. Oh, that's interesting. Nothing about who they were. Zero zilch. just that, right? And so I do blame the media a lot. And yeah, I mean, there were a lot of mistakes that were made all around, but I personally don't know if they knew that stuff, all of that fraud stuff before. I don't know if they knew that.
Steve?
I was under the impression that maybe not all of it, but that the Zimmerman campaign knew
Oh, I didn't.
some of it, and
Okay.
that no one would listen, and it just kind of kept it down.
Mhm.
And you know, and I've heard from some people from that were affiliated with the campaign that some of his interns were a little upset that if he knew this and didn't pound it. And I guess maybe it wasn't his style, but he needed to do that. If I was his campaign manager, I would have had him every stump speech. Talk about yourself, talk about you, and by the way, this guy's a fraud.
Right.
And
I did not know that any of that. I mean, I knew that there was that 80-something page Oppo document that the DCCC produced that was circulated everywhere. I know like some of the things that were in that, but I honestly did not know that a lot of the fraud stuff. I thought it was more the finance stuff and the insurrection stuff that they knew.
yeah, I've heard that they had maybe not all the specifics, but I heard that, and I'm hearing it from people that, you know, were affiliated or around the campaign, not from Robert or anybody else, but I know I've heard Robert say we knew stuff,
Right.
and I don't know specifics, and and if you knew stuff, you got to say it every day.
So today, when I put TV on or I pick up the paper, it's Santos did this today, or he said that today, and people are getting their jollies from all this stuff, you know, and it's increasing the ratings on the outlet that's saying it. Okay, so here's my point. My point is, this was a grievous error to have somebody of his caliber, you know, none of us are perfect, but some of us are more imperfect than others. A person of that character should be elected to Congress. The party was at fault in a way. The press was at fault in a way, but none of that is being covered. Nobody's ever said, "Oh, you know, this happened on Long Island, and George Santos got elected because X, Y, and Z with the press, X, Y, and Z with the party," and that's stuff that has to be told. It has to be told, because if it happened now, who's to say it won't happen again? Or in a way, maybe it's happened before. What do you think?
I totally think it's happened before now. I feel like this must have, I was really shocked to find out as a result of all of this that, you know, people who get elected to Congress get security clearance by virtue of winning an election, and they don't do any background checks. That blows my mind. To work for a tech company in this country, you go through insane global background checks. And you're telling me that to actually be someone who's receiving, secrets about our country and things that, could harm us, keep us safe, people who have information in their hands that, they could use in negative ways, that we don't do a background check on who they are. I think that's a failure in the system, absolutely. And that does lead me to believe that we have a lot of frauds, a lot of fraudulent people sitting there.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
I think that, I think when you look at the people that we're electing in recent years, I think a lot of the loss of quality goes to exactly what Reema is saying. We're not vetting these people. We're not making sure they're who they are. That we're not demanding excellence. I mean, we've got people in Congress who are completely incompetent. They're crazy, but where they're there. I mean, you've got Representative Gosar out in Arizona, who his own family, his siblings, his
Right.
family is saying the man is not all there. Yet he gets elected every 2 years. I mean, if anybody knows the guy's crazy, it's his own family.
Mhm.
And they're not saying they disagree with his politics. They're saying he's crazy. Yet every year, this guy gets reelected. And we have to look inside ourselves and inside our politics and ask why. And I think we're hit on some of it today. Some of it is we're not demanding the best. When I was growing up, I always thought elected officials were the best and the brightest. I spent 2 years as counsel in the state Senate. I spent 6 years as counsel in the New York City Council. I don't think that anymore. Um, I, I, I and I also think that we need to demand more from our press. And as I think that the press gets more and more diverse, not in the sense of demographics, but back when I was growing up, there was 3 newspapers in the city. There was the Daily News, there was the Post, and the Times. And that's where you're going to get your news from there, or you're going to get your news from ABC News at 6 o'clock, or NBC News at 6 o'clock, or CBS News at 6 o'clock. Now it's 24 hours, and it's coming from all these cable channels. It's coming from this website, who has a blog, and the quality has gone down. The availability of it is better. We're getting it at the minute, but the quality's gone down.
Mhm.
So we've got a press that's not as good as it used to be. And we're not demanding the best from our elected officials, from our candidates. And that's a recipe for disaster.
And so, when you put the TV on it and they, it's not only the cable news programs, it's the comedians on TV who are having a heyday with this stuff. And, how do you tell these people, hey, stop joking around and say how this guy got elected so that it would never happen again? But it's not happening. Me doing these YouTube videos, I mean, I'm not reaching everybody in the country. I'd like to, but how do you make the people who report all this stuff do better? What do you think, Reema?
Reema?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Steve was going to say something.
That's okay.
Honestly, I don't know. I think that, we need it's very unfortunate. I don't blame Newsday for not doing local election coverage. They don't have the budgets for it. They don't have the staff. I think, especially here in New York, we have, especially here on Long Island, we live in a media shadow of Manhattan, of the city, of city politics in general. Even though we do have a bit of our district that's in Queens, the New York Times did not cover this race at all traditionally. And I think it's a shame. I don't know why. I don't understand why they wouldn't. But I do understand Newsday. They don't have the money. They don't have the staff. I get it. New York Times, what's their excuse? I think it's a matter of just what politics has become now, which is just, like reality television. It's very shameful and sad that we can't even, we cannot be trusted. We cannot trust a major political party, in Nassau County, New York, to put up, and Queens County, New York, to put up a candidate that isn't a fraud. Right? The Republicans, we need to talk about this more too. How did the Republicans just say, oh, that's your resume, thumbs up, go for it? What? All of these Republicans, they campaigned with this guy for 4 years, 19, 20, 21, 22. And none of them had an inkling that he's not on the level. I mean, that's a bit much for me. Now, all of a sudden, all of them want him to resign. But you had no idea when you literally would just, spend so much time campaigning with this guy. You had no clue. That doesn't sit well with me. I think that we have to put, yes, we're Democrats and we love to eat each other and we love to blame ourselves. We are good at that. But I think that we need to look at the Republicans and say, how is this your guy? How was this your guy? Like, what were you thinking? The people and Republicans of New York should be very upset that they literally, this is their party and this is the guy that they told them they backed, that the Republicans of Nassau and Queens backed. Wow, what were they thinking?
Steve?
Yeah, I think, I used to say more often than I do now, that there's kooks on the far spectrum of both parties,
Right.
but us Democrats, we have kooks, but we generally don't elect them. Where it's become now that you look at the House of Representatives, probably majority of them are kooks. I mean, it's gotten to the point with Republicans that you've got to be so crazy to win a primary that you have to sell your soul to the devil. And I'm sure there's some of them that may not believe even what they're saying themselves,
Oh,
but
I
they have to say it.
100% think that's true.
But at the same time, I mean, we've got a handful of those now in the Democratic Party. But generally we don't elect kooks. And I don't know if that's because our voters are more discerning, or we do a better job of vetting. I don't know what the answer to that is, but and we've got some crazies out there, but they're not a majority. With the other side, it's hard to pick out the kooks when there's so many of them. When you've got George Santos here is a complete fraud and we can't catch him, but then there's an incumbent in Georgia who thinks that that forest fires are started by Jewish space lasers. I mean, it's hard to pick the kooks out, when there's so many of them.
Okay, no, you guys have brought up real relevant facts. What I'm trying to say is, okay, all this stuff has been going on, but the media is like, okay, this one said this, that one said that, ha ha ha. How do you get to the bottom of this where qualified people will sit in Congress and really represent Congress? It's not being done. It's all ratings right now. So George Santos, who's crazy, is boosting the ratings of all of these media outlets because he says outrageous things. How do you change that?
Well, I think we all can at least point one thing out. If George Santos was a Democrat and this had come out, this story would be over because they would have expelled him immediately. I don't think that if George Santos was a Democrat, and this goes back to what Steve was saying, at this point, George Santos is the standard bearer for the Republican Party. They're okay with him. They don't think he's done anything wrong. As a matter of fact, they put him on 2 committees. Then when the public was like, what are you guys doing? They were like, oh, let's track back a little bit. Otherwise, they were going full force with this guy, full steam ahead. And I do think there's a difference. I know for a fact that if this had come out and George Santos was a Democrat, this story would be over. I think that, that has to be pointed out as well. We can't just say, oh, both sides, because there's no way that this would have been a story continually. The reason this is so crazy is because it's still happening. He's still there, even though everyone in the district, I think he has a 6 or 7% approval rating in the district. That's it. Everyone wants him gone. All of the Republicans elected want him gone. His Republicans elected from Long Island in Congress have told him, we want you gone. You need to resign. But the party, Kevin McCarthy, his good friend, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Freedom Caucus is the Republican Party now. And I really think they are very much to blame for the atmosphere that we're in, way more than the Democrats are. And I am a Democrat, but I'm not saying that like, I truly do believe that these are just facts. I don't think I'm being biased. Maybe I am, but I
I
wouldn't-
read this morning that Santos is raising money for 2024.
I read the same thing.
Can you imagine? So
I mean,
this,
who would give him money now at this point? I mean, it's
People, imagine. So his press secretary is one of his biggest donors' daughters right now, a family here on Long Island, who still are very supportive of him, still on the record. Oh, you know what? He's doing what we sent him there to do. As long as he votes the way we want him to vote, we're okay with it. So mind you, that these are his Republican supporters. Some of them in the district. We know it to be a minority because the recent polling tells us that, a majority of this district wants him gone, but there are still the people that are giving him money.
so with all of the press I'm sorry, Steve.
I just said it's crazy. That's all I said. One word, crazy.
With all of the press he's getting, people who are out there say negative press is better than no press at all. Do you think Santos is of that philosophy? He doesn't care as long as he's being talked about? What do you think?
I don't know how he sleeps at night. I don't know how he I don't know how he walks around. I mean, I'd be too embarrassed.
I know.
God, if that was me to show, I don't know how you could even show your face in Washington. I mean, he's got chutzpah, that's
Right.
I heard that he's loving all of the attention. He's not a normal person. I mean, he's not normal. I heard that he's loving all of this attention, that he was at a mixer for freshman Republicans, that was thrown by Kevin McCarthy. And he said at that mixer that this might be Kevin McCarthy's event, but I'm the most famous politician here. He's
Oh
loving.
boy. Wow. Wow.
and McCarthy's not going to get rid of him because, as Reema said, this district is purple, and especially after what just happened, you would think that if you had a special election, that Democrat would have a very strong possibility of
Right.
winning. And right now, if you flipped 5 seats from the Republicans, you'd have a Democratic majority. So we've got, I think, 222 Republicans and 212 Democrats, and there's one vacant seat, which is a Democratic seat where a rep passed away. So, I mean, if your majority is only 5 and you lose 1, you're really, 5 is not a lot to start with.
Right. Right.
And if something, if there's something that the Democrats are trying to push, that let's say you have a moderate Republican who's going to run in next year for re-election in a district that Biden took in 2020, and Biden's running for re-election in 2024, it should be pretty easy in that case for Hakeem Jeffries to bring those moderates over for a vote or two. So, McCarthy has to be careful, and that will happen. You will mark my words. This year or next year, you're going to have some sane bipartisan law that the Democrats put through that they're going to get 4 or 5 moderate Republicans that are worried about their seats voting for it.
Yeah.
And that's why McCarthy is giving this guy a shield.
Mm-hmm. So, it doesn't look like Santos is going to resign anytime soon or go away. This is going to be a continuing saga. So, would you guys be interested in coming back to talk about what's going on and to shed some light on it from your perspective?
Anytime, I'd love to.
Sure.
This has been absolutely wonderful. You've been listening to I'm sorry, Reema
Rasool.
Rasool. I get yelled at every time I pronounce the name wrong. And Steve Bihar, and this is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. But most importantly, I believe that what was said today is really important and should be added to the national dialogue. So please not only subscribe, but share it with somebody and have them share it. Hopefully, there'll be enough people that we can make a difference in the future of American politics. So thank you guys. I really appreciate this. We'll talk soon. And thank you everybody for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you.